So I'm here with Jennifer Marsh, who is from Procter and Gamble, Vice President of Victor Mills Society for Hair Care. Now I'm like totally ignorant for what that title actually means. So maybe you can give a better introduction of yourself. So would you mind introducing who you are and what you do?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me onto the podcast. Yes, my name's Jennifer Marsh. I'm one of the senior technologists within P&G. So the Victor Mills Society is a society of our top technologists within the company, and I've been working in P&G for 28 years, 27 of those in the hair care space, and very much looking at materials and mechanisms to try and figure out how can we develop technologies that delight the consumer.
And so, from this answer here, it might be obvious what the talk is going to be about this afternoon. We're going to be talking about how UV impacts hair, and a quick thank you to Procter and Gamble for sponsoring this section and also by doing that supporting this e-summit. So thank you so much to Procter and Gamble. And my first question is, why does hair need sun protection?
Well, I think because we're out in the sun all day or every day or many different days, and hair, because hair is dead once it comes out of the scalp and it grows, and hair grows about a centimeter a month. And so this hair that you see on your head has been exposed to the sun on a very frequent basis. And because it's a dead substrate, it can't rejuvenate itself. So if you think about skin, and when you get exposed to the sun with skin, your skin can recover, your hair can't recover. So I think it's even more important to protect it, because if I want to have long, healthy hair, that's going to be growing on my head for about 2 or 3 years to get to the length that it needs. So I need to protect it very much from those daily insults of the UV exposure.
And so UV exposure does impact hair quality, but maybe you can expand on how exactly does it impact the quality of hair?
So the end signals you would see of UV exposure would be, for example, split ends, breakage. The hair might look less aligned, so you might see frizz, etc. And particularly, for example, if you've been on a summer holiday, at the end of that summer holiday where you've been out in the sun frequently, you might see that your hair just doesn't feel and look as healthy. And so, like, the fundamental chemistry or what's happening is that the hair is absorbing the UV light. You're creating kind of a hair with energy, or the molecules have energy, create these excited states. And those excited states start to create reactive oxygen species. So you start to create chemistries that will break down the bonds within the hair. So as you break down those bonds, and then you come along and you brush, comb, sort of flat iron, do all the things that you do naturally, you've essentially weakened the hair structure. And that leads to the breakage. Breakage leads to split ends, and then leads to differences in how the hair feels and looks in terms of healthiness. The other thing that can happen is that we have melanin in our hair that gives hair color. And similar to in skin, the melanin can help protect you from the UV. So if you have darker skin, you get less skin UV damage. The same is true for hair. So darker hair has less UV damage because that melanin absorbs some of that UV light. So the consequence is, if you have lighter hair, sometimes you'll see the hair get lighter. So in the summer, you'll go out, you have the ends start to get lighter. That's again a signal that you're degrading the chemistry of the melanin and degrading the chemistry of the hair, and that's leading to the consequences of you're seeing breakage and less healthy hair.
Super interesting. Super interesting to think about how UV damages hair versus skin, which our attendees for this conference are going to be learning a lot all throughout the day. So, a different angle here. So, that leads me to my next question. Is there an effective way to protect hair from UV damage? And then also, how is the approach for protecting hair different from or even similar to what we would do for protecting skin against UV damage?
Yeah, so if we think about UV damage to skin, so these and versus hair, the essential chemistry processes that are going on are very similar. So again, you're absorbing the UV, you're creating these reactive oxygen species. These reactive oxygen species are then setting off different consequences. In the skin, that's going to be things like irritation and sunburn. The skin gets red. You might see then protection of your increased production of melanin, so you see tanning, so your skin gets darker. And in the skin case, though, that skin will eventually, because it's a living tissue, will regenerate itself. So over time, you'll see the skin go back to its normal color. You'll lose some of that redness over maybe a week's time frame. If I think about the hair is because it's a dead tissue, can't rejuvenate itself. So you have to think about the strategies differently to protecting hair, which is more of a dead tissue versus skin, which is a live tissue. The other thing to consider is surface area. So how much skin have I got to cover and protect versus how much hair have I got to protect? So in a skincare context, typically you'll use UV absorbers. So you'll put on skin UV protection. So what they're doing is they're absorbing that UV light that would normally be absorbed by the skin, and you're essentially destroying those UV protectors and not creating those reactive oxygen species. That same approach doesn't really work with hair, because hair has got like very much higher surface area. And you really then would need to overload it with all of these UV absorbers to really get adequate protection. And it doesn't feel very good. So you can do it, but you'd have to put on so much of these UV absorbers just that the hair just feels sticky and greasy and oily and really unpleasant. So that strategy that you use in skin doesn't really work in hair. And we've done a lot of research to say, are there other approaches to protect the hair? And really what we identified was that you could have contamination in hair, particularly low levels of copper. And I'll tell you later where that's coming from. But the basically acting as catalysts for that reactive chemistry. So rather than stopping the absorption of the UV, when you create the reactive oxygen species, you're preventing the catalytic formation of more and more reactive oxygen species. And we've shown that low levels of copper, and it's well known in the sort of scientific literature that you'll just accelerate all of that damage with these low levels of metal contaminants. And in hair, this copper is coming from the tap water. So you're washing your hair every day. There's low levels of copper in the water that come from the pipes and the hot water systems, and the hair is essentially absorbing those catalytic metals. And because it's dead and not rejuvenating itself, it can't get rid of those metals. They just accumulate over time. Whereas in skin, that's not such a problem, because the skin is constantly rejuvenating itself. So it might absorb some copper from the water, but then all of that top layer of the skin kind of comes off over time. So what we showed was, okay, if that's the mechanism, these contaminants are accelerating that chemistry that's damaging the hair. How do we remove them? And again, once you go into the literature and we consulted with some external experts, you essentially use something called a chelant, which is a molecule that specifically goes and finds the copper in the hair, doesn't get distracted by calcium and other things that might be there, complex it, and then come back out again during the rinse phase. And so that was kind of quite a lot of research just to make sure you could find the right material that was going to do that. So we created a chelant. It's called histidine. It's an amino acid, has the appropriate properties to penetrate into the hair quickly, find the copper, complex it, take it out. And then by doing that, you're taking out the accumulation of these catalytic materials that are going to damage the hair.
And would this be the main route of protecting hair against UV damage? Are there anything else, like, for example, even just like wearing a sun hat, something like that? What's the influence there? And for the complex, is for Procter or for Pantene, I'm assuming it's in Pantene products. Which products is it in? But also, would it be mostly in rinse off formulations, I would imagine?
Yeah, so we have put this chelant across Pantene shampoos and conditioners, because in both of those, you've got the chance to complex the copper and remove it. And so it works very effectively from a rinse off. So every time you wash, you accumulate a little bit of copper, but then every time you wash it with the Pantene, you you also remove it, so you stop that accumulation. Also, yes, I mean, you can wear a hat. So again, you're stopping absorption of UV. You can cover your hair with a hat, etc. is going to help very effectively, because then you're just going to stop the absorption of the UV. We just can't wear a hat. People don't wear a hat every time they go out in the sun. So yes, if you're going to go out in the strong sun, I would recommend you wear a hat. But there's also protection just from the daily use. I go to my car or I go out for a walk in the park. You can be exposed to a certain amount of UV.
And so, with everything that we've just been talking about in mind, how do you measure for efficacy of UV protection in hair care?
So I think one of the advantages of working in hair care versus skincare is you can get hair because it's a dead tissue. So we can take hair from consumers. They sell us their ponytails when they want to cut their hair. So we can take that hair and then create an environment that's similar to the conditions that you would have if you went out in the sun. So we have a box that you can put the hair in, expose it to sunlight that would be equivalent of being out in the sun in the midday. And then you can go and technically measure the changes to the hair. So we've said that exposure to UV will break the bonds in the hair. So I can go and measure that bond breakage. We know that it also impacts the lipid structures, which is basically holding the protein structures together in hair, similar to in skin. We know they also undergo oxidation, so we can extract those lipids out and measure how much oxidation has happened. We can also measure the effectiveness of the chelants that we're adding into Pantene to protect that by seeing how much of that damage we can reduce by using Pantene. So you would do a protocol where you'll wash with a competitor shampoo versus Pantene shampoo with a chelant, and then look at the outcome in terms of the amount of bond breakage and lipid damage as an endpoint after exposure to the UV. We can also directly measure how much we can control uptake of that copper. So we can dose copper into the water at a level that would be similar to a consumer's home. And then at the end of 15, 20 washes, measure how effectively we're removing that copper from the hair. And then we know the more we can remove it, the better we're going to be in terms of damage protection. Because one of the important things about this oxidative chemistry is that these metals are what we call catalytic, which means you only need a very, very small amount to get a lot of extra radical damage, because they form a radical and then they rejuvenate themselves and then they form another radical, and kind of that's the definition of catalytic. So even at the ppm level, you can see the consequences on consumers' hair over multiple cycles. And this is something that you'll see kind of in a chronic sense rather than an acute sense. I think the other thing you can do in a product is you can use conditioners and other, we have other products within our lineup that, as you get dry hair or you get split ends or the hair feels damaged, you can also use those products to help give protection and make the hair feel and look healthier.
Okay, so I have two more questions for you that aren't scripted, but I'll ask them anyway. So, second last is, do you have any final take homes that you'd want to leave with the audience here today, and or any nuggets of information that we haven't had a chance to cover, but you'd like to just get it out there?
I think we don't really appreciate that hair needs protection from the UV. We know very very well how skin needs protection from UV, and we use products and we take care of our skin when we go out in the sun. I think you don't appreciate that the hair is also getting damaged over time, and there is things out there we can do to protect the chronic damage. So using products that can minimize the creation of this reactive oxygen species, I think is something that I'm not sure people are aware that it's even possible. So I think just kind of making sure that, yes, UV will damage hair, and there are solutions out there. They're different solutions than we use for skin, but that's because skin is very different, and with the strategies we're using are different, but we still have solutions out there that we can use.
And then my last question is for audience members looking to learn more about some of the things we were talking about today. Do you have any resources that you can point them towards, or any journals, maybe Journal of Cosmetic Science, or maybe there's something internally with Procter and Gamble.
Yeah, so we've published this work pretty extensively. I think we have 3 publications, maybe 4 publications that cover the different mechanisms. We also know that these metals interfere with the damage from hair color, because hair color, when using a hair colorant, you're also using oxidative chemistry because you're using hydrogen peroxide at high pH, and these metals can also accelerate damage in a coloring context. So we have several publications, and I can pass them to you via Jenny. Or I might have your email. And then we have several publications where we've looked specifically at UV damage. So we have some methods on how we can specifically look at markers of UV damage in the protein degradation, and then show the reduction by reducing the amount of metals in the system. So there are several peer-reviewed publications, most of them in the International Journal of Cosmetic Science.
So, for my audience, many of you are members of the SEC, so you will have access to
We
the
will.
Journal of Cosmetic Science with your membership. So, if you'd like to learn more, there's a resource for you. Thank you so much, Jen or Jennifer. I know I'm Jen, so I'll call you Jennifer. This was such a pleasure learning from you. Massive thank you again to Procter and Gamble or Pantene. Should I say Pantene or Procter and Gamble? I've said Procter and Gamble throughout this presentation. So maybe I'll just say massive thank you to P&G for sponsoring the eSummit as a Pocket Talk sponsor. It's because of sponsors like you that we're able to make this summit free for everyone. Thank you so much. I think that was great.